So in this video we're going to talk about Bertolt Brecht's Antigone, obviously an adaptation of the Sophocles play Antigone, and in this case translated by Judith Malina of the Living Theatre. Interestingly enough, translated, or the translation was begun while Malina herself was in prison. Larger story. But so Brecht has a really interesting approach to Antigone, in part shaped by his own experiences in World War II, and in part shaped, obviously, by his own conception of what theater should do, of epic theater. So if you know anything about 20th century theater, you're almost certainly familiar with Brecht, who's one of the most important thinkers of contemporary theater. And one of the things that Brecht is really concerned with is sort of theater for social awareness, or political economic awareness. And so he has this idea of the epic theater, which one component of it is sort of alienation, the Verfremdungseffekt in German. And it often gets translated as the alienation effect. And basically it's this idea that there should be a distance between both the performance and the audience, but also between the performance and the actor. So there are all kinds of ways that Brecht advocated for achieving this, and all kinds of things that he did in his own plays that would establish distance. Basically, the idea is that you forego the willing suspension of disbelief that's so traditional in pre-modernist theater, so say 19th century, 18th century, etc., etc. You don't have the illusion that, say, the Globe Theatre is the fields of France, as is famously said in Henry V by Shakespeare. You don't have that illusion. It's very clear in epic theater that you are watching a performance that's making commentary on something that's going on, something in your current political, social, cultural, economic system. And Brecht started writing Antigone shortly after World War II. He was a communist, he was opposed to the Nazis, but he went back to Germany, to East Germany, especially after the war, and he was very much interested in engaged theater. One of the things he was concerned about was anti-authoritarianism. Because again, he was a big opponent of the Nazi regime, and Antigone definitely reflects this. That being said, it is, in my opinion, a very ethically simplified version of Antigone that forgoes a lot of the complexity that we have in Sophocles' version. And I will be doing a video on Sophocles' Antigone in the not super distant future. I think, for me, one of the most important ways that Brecht sort of loses that complexity of the Sophocles version is he changes the basic crisis that precipitates the conflict of Antigone. So in Sophocles and in the myth, what happens is that her two brothers, Eteocles and Polineices, are fighting over the crown of Thebes. So their father/brother Oedipus had been king, then he dies, and Eteocles and Polineices work out a power-sharing arrangement, basically, where Polineices is going to rule for 1 year, then Eteocles is going to rule, and then they'll switch back and forth. When they get to the end of Eteocles' first year ruling, he's like, you know what, I kind of like this, and I don't actually want to let you rule. So he banishes Polynices. Polynices goes to Argos, and he raises an army to invade Thebes. The two brothers kill one another in combat around Thebes, and Creon, who then becomes the next king after Eteocles dies, declares that Eteocles is going to be buried and Polynices is not. In Brecht, the situation is quite different. So, Antigone gives us this... nope, sorry, that's the wrong... sorry. Antigone gives us this speech where she explains the situation. And it gets explained a couple of other times what had happened. But she says to Ismene, "In the long war our brother Eteocles died for us, one among many who died young in the tyrant's service. But our brother Polynices was even younger when he saw his brother trampled to death under the hooves of the war horse. In tears he fled from the unfinished battle. For others another decision is made by the battle spirit, when with a hard blow with his right he unnerves his hand. Now the fugitive lurches forward until he has crossed the Dircean river, breathing a sigh of relief at the sight of Thebes, his seven-gated city, when he's suddenly seized by blood-spattered Creon, who killed his brother, standing behind them, lashing them all into his battle, and he is slaughtered." And then slightly later she says, she refers to our two brothers, both dragged into Creon's war for the grey iron ore of distant Argos, and both killed. So in Brecht's version, Creon has been king of Argos for a good long time, and he starts the war with Argos. So this is a very, very different scenario. And actually I think this is quite significant because it makes it much easier for Brecht to simplify the agonistic conflict between Antigone and Creon to someone who is a tyrannical authority, Creon, versus someone who is anti-authoritarian in Antigone. If Antigone is... if Eteocles and Polynices both die because they want to be king of Thebes, and Antigone is supportive of them, it's a lot harder to see her as an unproblematically anti-authoritarian figure. If she basically supports the monarchy, just she doesn't support this one order by Creon, then she's not really anti-authoritarian. She is perfectly fine with monarchy, with tyranny, with authority, except she resists this one order. Whereas here, she's presented more as sort of across-the-board opponent of tyrannical power, which is not really what she is necessarily in Sophocles. So that's a really significant change, that this becomes, and also because Creon becomes the military aggressor here. He's leading the invasion of Thebes, or he's leading the invasion of Argos, rather than Polynices having raised an Argive army to attack Thebes to try and become the monarch again. So again, this takes out Antigone's implication in the mechanisms of Theban power, which in Sophocles, it's very clear that she is enmeshed in Theban authority. So that's a very interesting change. We also have some substantial changes that make it very evident that Brecht is thinking of World War II. Again, he starts writing this, I think, in 1947, and it's very clear from, for instance, the prologue. The prologue has two sisters, And it gives us a sort of summary version of this idea of the brother who runs away from battle and is punished, and the sister who goes to try and honor him. But the prologue is set in Berlin in April 1945, and it just has the two sisters. So the first and the second are the character names. So we get the sense that this is Ismene and Antigone, but they're not named that way. And so the fact that it's set in Berlin in 1945, that we have guns, that we have references to bombs, air raids, and things like this, would all be very familiar to a post-World War II audience. There was something else I was going to say about that was significant, but it's just gone. But the fact that we have that post-World War II connection, this is one of the alienation techniques that Brecht uses, because one of the things he said, and so many of Brecht's plays are set in different historical periods, like Mother Courage is set in the 30 Years' War, or they're set in foreign locations, or whatever it is. The Good Person of Szechuan, or The Good Woman of Szechuan, depending on who translates it, is set in Szechuan, China. And so Brecht, one of the things Brecht does is he creates distance. But he wants that distance to be sort of tenuous. So he wants Mother Courage not just to be about the 30 Years' War, but also to be about the current moment that the audience is seeing it. And so having this prologue set in Berlin in 1945 creates that sort of tension of like, this is an ancient play, but it has clear implications for the present. Another thing that we have that's a very clear World War II echo is Creon's disinformation about how the war is going. So he comes in and he proclaims victory, and he continually sort of refers to the amount of booty that's going to be coming in, and how they've killed a bunch of Argives and things like this, and basically the whole city starts celebrating. They all get drunk, they start doing these sort of bacchanalian dances and things like this. And then Tiresias comes in, the blind seer, and he basically says, hey, Creon, you fucked up. Not only should you have buried Polineices, you should not have punished Antigone, and actually, the war is still going on, and you've been lying to everybody. At which point, the chorus of elders of Thebes basically says, hey Creon, we'd like to know how the war is actually going. At which point, Creon says, the dirty war that Argos started is not over yet, and doesn't go too well. When I announced peace, there was only one little detail missing, and that is only because of Polineices' treason. That one little detail being that the war is actually not over, and Thebes is on the verge of losing it. And actually, shortly after that, a messenger comes in and basically says that Megaris, who is Creon's older son, older than Haemon, who Haemon is in the Sophocles play, but Megaris is not. So his messenger comes in and basically says, Megaris led a really stupid attack on Argos after you left, and the Argives destroyed our army, and now they're coming to invade Thebes. And Haemon, who was in charge of the sort of civil defense guards, is now pissed off at you because you have executed his fiancée, so he's not going to defend the city either. So basically, unlike in Greek mythology or in the Sophocles play, an Argive army does actually show up at the end and starts conquering Thebes because of Creon's failures as a leader. The last thing I want to talk about very briefly with Brecht's Antigone is the Antigone legend. So this is a poem that in this version we get at the beginning, a fairly lengthy poem, about 9 pages long in this edition. And basically it just tells the story of Antigone as Brecht reimagines it. And this is another sort of alienation technique, because what Brecht would do, and then what the Living Theatre did, because Judith Malina's Living Theatre produced this version of Antigone for years. So what they would often do is interrupt the rehearsal process and sometimes even the performance process to have the poem read in part or in whole. And again, this was a way of sort of breaking up the flow of the story, creating that disconnect and establishing for both the audience and the actors that what we're seeing is a theatrical construct. So again, that alienation effect, and part of the idea here is that the poem becomes commentary on the meaning of the events. And so that's essentially what Brecht wants, is he wants his audience to reflect critically on the things that they're seeing and to think about how the events of the story and the choices that these characters make are significant to the audience's own world.